Actually, I'm going to tuck in my shirt. This can go in the deleted scenes. Or the special features. Remember those days? The double disc special features days?
Let the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, like the
one.
bonus.
That was one of my favorite special features ones.
I mean, they had like hours and hours.
Yeah, I do remember that actually.
You learned a lot.
Arvoyarns. But anyway, so, hey everybody. Welcome to Arvoyarns. This week we've got Dave Bloovman. Dave's a great buddy of mine, my neighbor, owner of a composting company in Philadelphia with his wife, Michele, and he's a great guy. We're happy to have him on.
Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Welcome.
So anyway, before this, we were talking about special features discs. Remember back in the day, all the DVDs, or at least the really good ones that you'd buy, would have the double disc or more of the special features. We were specifically talking about Lord of the Rings and how there was just like hours and hours of content. I was thinking back to my days in New Zealand. I went to school for a semester at a polytechnic university for product design while I was working in New Zealand, and one of the women that was in my course was reskilling herself as a product designer. In a previous life, she was a high-end professional movie makeup artist, and so obviously came up Lord of the Rings. And she had like stories on like every single person and stuff.
She worked
like
on the.
yeah, she worked on. She
That's
worked
crazy.
full time, $3,000 a week
Wow.
for 3 years. She booked out in the beginning for 3 years.
I wonder when you walk around New Zealand, what's the chance if you ask a random person, did you work on Lord of the Rings?
It's one degree of separation
never
for
know.
people that know people that have,
Yeah.
at the very least. I mean, they were talking about how it like for literally years it changed the whole dynamic of New Zealand in terms of the commerce that a lot of the places in New Zealand would get. I mean, there would just be bars that these movie stars would visit like every week because they just happened to be in town filming and stuff like that, and all of the extra employment. And it was it really helped New Zealand a lot. And the interesting thing is that ultimately, like a lot of times you see with like projects like that, similar to like the Olympics where you build a lot of infrastructure because you have to, but then where does it go afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were pretty savvy in that it became a sort of self-sustaining system in a lot of ways, where it was sort of initially because of Lord of the Rings, but then the communities ended up galvanizing around the things that they had built and stuff, and a lot of stuff.
I mean, I remember reading
like
about
Hobbiton.
the effect of like The Wire, a TV show, like on the economy of Baltimore. The show itself like practically jump started it. I mean, it's like a whole tiny country that you're running.
I loved that show. Yeah, my wife, Michele, she doesn't like any show that is serial in nature, anything that continues. She loves Law and Order shows that
She's one of those.
She's one of those.
Which one?
Yeah.
SVU?
She doesn't discriminate. I think she likes
Really?
most of the Law and Order. I think she celebrates the entire portfolio.
They're not all equal though.
Yeah, but just that style of show.
Wait,
It's
does
not
she
so
know
much
about like stuff like
just
like Midsummer Murders? Because like something about like detective shows, they're very self-contained. It's like we're current characters, but
yeah.
like arc.
That's the thing. She likes self-contained shows. Single episodes. She doesn't want to commit to. She doesn't want to be emotionally attached to characters over the course of a season. So something like The Wire, when I wanted to watch it, it wasn't like a joint effort. It wasn't like, oh, let's watch The Wire tonight. It had to be either like me throwing it on when at the time she used to travel for the work that she did, and it had to be either while she was away or after she went to bed. But there were times that I would just put it on, and she would always enjoy, and she would always kind of get absorbed into it. But that's one of the only shows for me personally that I watched the entire, the entire series, all 5 seasons, and really enjoyed it. So.
Yeah, it's such a great show because I don't know if there's any other show that does like season by season, like, you know, engage in that kind of like almost like institutional critique.
Each season had a theme.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like the docs or whatever, like
Yeah.
the media.
The Docs was
You know?
my favorite season
Yeah,
2.
I agree. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It was literally about docs and
It had to
like the
do-
commerce around docs and like.
Well, it
Sounds
was
like criminal
yeah.
underground.
It explored how how drugs were coming in via ports, and it went pretty deep into that element.
Dude, I'm not gonna give away names here, but my buddy is in the Coast Guard, and he does a lot of boardings, because he's actually in like the Special Forces wing.
You mean like sort of like random checks?
Well, it's
of
not.
what's going on.
Well, he's like, yeah. So there's the random ones, and then there's the tip ones. But I'm asking, I'm like, there's so much cargo you guys are bringing in. Like, how often do you think drugs are coming through? And he's like, oh, every day. I mean, how is it? How could it not be every single day? There's only 365 days in a year. There's so much cargo. It's impossible to check it all. It's impossible to check even most of it.
I don't know what the percentage is at U.S. ports, but I remember being in Dubai for the work that I do years ago.
That's baller.
And you mentioned that I'm co-owner with Michele of a composting business, but I've been working for 18 years. We've only had that business for the last 4 or 5 years, and Michele works full time for that business. I work full time elsewhere. And and the industry that I work in revolves around scrap textile materials. So I was in Dubai for a trade show related to textile materials, and speaking with someone there. I happened to end up speaking with someone who worked at the port in Jebel Ali, which at the time was the second busiest port in the world, and he said that they check, and this is Dubai. It's not. I don't know what the percentage is at U.S. ports, but it was like less than 1% of the containers that flow through the port are actually checked. I mean, there's just such a massive number of containers going through the world's busiest ports that it's borderline impossible, if not entirely impossible, to check any sort of large percentage of them.
I remember getting educated on this in a roundabout way for a company I work for. That part of their employee training was explaining, hey, so these type of companies you can or can't work with, and this is why, from a legal basis of like, oh, this company has sanctions against it, so we can't work with them, or and many other circumstances. But they were saying, as far as ports are concerned, which doesn't actually come into play at all because we sell software, but they explained the port juxtaposition of how they mostly find out, because if it's 1% or less than 1%, how the fuck do you choose the 1%? And they said that it's primarily based on logs of all the places the ship has been, because if it like goes to a sketchy country that's red flagged for whatever reason, like Somalia or something, they'll be like, oh, well, we need to check it when it comes into port.
I think your Somalian viewers may take issue with you referring to Somalia as a sketchy country.
I don't think it's a sketchy country necessarily, but it is red flagged in a lot of these port systems.
Fair enough.
Or like, for instance, the holding company or wherever the company is based, the HQ is, like, certain companies HQ'd in certain places will like always get checked just because that country is known for certain types of activity.
Yeah, that particular country's on a list, or for some other reason that container or that ship is on the list. Sure.
We'll talk a little bit more about what it was like to be there. And what was it for? For a textile?
To be in Dubai?
Yeah.
Well, it was for actually a medical-related trade show, but the company I work for had an interest in being there, and it turned out it was a total bust. It was just a really small trade show. So I traveled all the way over there, and I was done at the trade show within not even a full day. Luckily, I was there with another friend of mine whose uncle has a business based in Dubai, and his uncle has an office there. So I ended up spending most of my time back and forth between his uncle's office, where essentially just picked up a phone book and started cold calling businesses related to the industry, anything related to non-woven textiles, the industry that I work in, and ended up having a bunch of meetings in the duty-free zone there, which
It was language like a barrier, or they were speaking English?
It was, well, everywhere I went with Rob, my friend who was there with me, he speaks Farsi, so no issue there. But yeah, it was a little bit of a barrier. I mean, this was 2005.
Okay.
I think
things have changed a lot.
Yeah, so like I don't even remember exactly how I went back and forth between Rob's uncle's office and the duty-free zone. I mean, probably just some sort of car service that Rob or his uncle knew of. But I definitely wasn't Ubering back and forth. And I don't know that the taxi drivers spoke any English, but I think just give them just write down the address where you're going and hand it to them and let them look at that. But yeah, it was a good experience. But really, the best part of the experience for me was being there with Rob. And meeting some of the people with whom his uncle does business, and yeah, from a business perspective for my company, it wasn't particularly fruitful.
Was that like how long had you been working there? By the time that you got.
I mean, I started working for Fibmatics, the name of the company. I started working there in 2002. So this was about 3 years in, and one of the owner's best attributes is, he'll find something, whether it's something like a trade show in Dubai or just a particular website or a new product that he sees out there, and he'll say, hey, let's look into this and see if it's something that's for us. So in this case, he found this trade show and said, David, you want to check this out? I said, sure. Now at that time, I was only a few years in. So, I was in a position where I had time to kind of just explore anything, throw a bunch of stuff against the wall, see what sticks. It's not the case now. I've been there 18 years, so I'm not doing things on as much of a speculative basis. But
it's great that you had the time to actually
back
do that.
Then, yeah, it was.
That freedom.
It was cool. And now things are pretty busy for me there. So,
did you expect then to be in it for the long haul?
I mean, I didn't have any exact time frame in mind, but yes, I did want to be there. I knew that I wanted to be there for, I don't have any exact amount of time defined. During college, I took a year off in the middle of college, and worked for an internet startup. This was the year 2000. I was actually working for that company. I remember I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The company was doing things on college campuses, so I focused on 5 or 6 college campuses around the country and just lived at hotels and stuff. And I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan in March, I believe it was March of 2000, when the NASDAQ dropped from 5,000 to 1,500 and the Dow tanked. And so I was working for a startup at that time. But anyway, I traveled. And nothing, it didn't affect the company I was working for. But a lot happened, outside of... just in general. But I traveled a lot during that year, and I knew that I then went back to college, finished up, and I knew when I graduated that I wanted to kind of put down roots somewhere. So I knew I wanted to be in Philly, and when I started working for Fibmatics, it was with every intention of living in Philly, wanting to.
And is that 2005?
This was 2002. Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to. At the time, I was open to travel, but I didn't want to live out of hotels like I did during that year off. I wanted to live in one particular place, and I was okay to travel to other areas. I had a job offer as well from GE, where they wanted me to live in 4 different areas, 6 months at a time, and then after those 2 years, you sort of apply for jobs within GE, and it was a cool offer, but GE at the time was one of the largest companies in the world, and the company I went to work for, Fibmatics, was a small business, and I was more into that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how long ago was it that you started the composting endeavor?
Michele and I started that business in 2016. She worked full time as a food scientist. She's had a very successful career as a food scientist.
She's a serious foodie.
Yeah, I mean, when you pick up like a package of like anything in the grocery store and you look at all those ingredients that most people don't know what all those ingredients are. She does. She knows what all of those ingredients are. So, she, as a food scientist, she would do formulations, a lot of it in Excel, a lot of it, testing in labs, and then she would travel to the manufacturing sites, and these are huge companies. So, the only time that they can get on their machinery to test making new foods are like off times. So she would be running this huge machine at 3:00 in the morning, like 2 hours outside of Chicago, but she's had a very successful career in food science. When we moved, we lived in Northern Liberties. I was in Northern Liberties for 11 years. She was there with me for 7 years. We moved from Northern Liberties to next door to Pete. Before Pete lived here, he came a little later.
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, it was pretty gentrified when I got here.
Yeah,
I kind of missed the boat on being part of that pilgrimage train.
Yeah, Northern Liberties has seen quite a bit of gentrification where we lived prior, and
There's Fishtown, which they call the new Brooklyn. Just so obnoxious.
That's where I live.
You live in Fishtown?
I moved from Brooklyn to Fishtown.
There it is.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But
so when we moved here in 2014, Michele stopped working in food science full time, and it wasn't until 2016 that we just started. I mean, when you read about the environmental crisis that our planet is experiencing, the way that Michele and I reacted.
I mean, were you thinking about that even, say, like in the year 2000, or because that was a couple years before. When did like An Inconvenient Truth come out? That was like 2007, maybe.
Yes, probably sometime around then.
I was trying to think of like when it first really like burst into my consciousness or whatever.
Yeah, for me, I can think of particular events where I started to think more and more about what's going on and kind of be more aware. But I can't pinpoint like. I mean, I guess if I really like there was an episode of the Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin show. Yeah. And we could look up what year that show came out, but it was like their EPA episode, and basically like a couple of these reporters are realizing that, at least at the time, and this was under Obama, Sorkin's interpretation was that the EPA was basically a shell, basically not a lot happening there. And there was this one part where one of the reporters is talking to another and going on and on about all these environmental just disasters. And it sounded like they were talking about something that like was possible like maybe 50 years from now that we had to worry about. And then he's like, no, that's happening right now. This is happening right now in some parts of the world. And then the reporter he's talking to is like, the Mets won last night 4-3. And that really stayed with me because like I feel like I'll be reading this like just horribly depressing, catastrophic story online, and then a minute later I'll flip over to like the Phillies score or whatever,
Yeah,
so
it's the juxtaposition of all these things.
So that stayed with me, and I couldn't get that scene out of my mind.
Who are the Mets playing?
I'm a Phillies fan, for the record. It's just that the Newsroom was taking place in New York. That show, I liked that show a lot. I think it went 3 seasons.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of it.
Yeah, but yeah. So Michele and I just started talking about like, okay, well, what's something we can do? And we both have backgrounds, essentially as business people. So we started thinking about like what kind of business could we start that could maybe have some impact. So she's the majority owner of the business. She now works full time for the business. Initially when we started it in 2016, we didn't know where it was going. We didn't know how much it would grow over the years to come. But we just wanted to do something, and it's been an interesting experience to, start something, really not know what kind of reaction we would get, and to see a really positive response from people in Philadelphia, and people to sign up for that service. I mean, they pay to have their food scraps picked up and made into compost. That's residential customers. Commercial customers. We have commercial customers as well. But just speaking of the residential side, people have to want to do this enough to pay something to have their food scraps separately picked up. They could throw them in the trash for free.
When I'm in my parents live in South Jersey, and they compost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's easy, they have a little place where they put it in the backyard, and I always think, I notice in my own habits when I'm here in Philadelphia, I'm just much less likely to compost, but just because of the inconvenience of it, which is kind of sad.
Well, Circle Compost
There you
makes
go.
it convenient for you.
They give you that bucket.
Yeah, beautiful buckets.
And it's cheap. It's only $12 a month for the every other week pickup service, so it's pretty cheap. That's like one drink at a lot of bars in Philly. 2, maybe 3 during happy hour. But anyway,
would it be sacrilegious to get cremated when you die? Do you think you need to decompose? Just for the sake of
It's nice to think about.
There's actually a business, and there may be more than one business, but I happened to hear an interview on NPR a few weeks ago. That's it's human composting.
Yeah.
For when people die,
super cool. I'm totally gonna do it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're one of the books that I've read about composting, it was a guy down in Texas. I forget the name of the book, but it was specifically about static pile composting, and now
you're talking about non-turned over pile.
You turn the piles, but static pile meaning you make the pile. You can turn the pile, but it's not an aerated static pile. You don't have air blowing into it.
Can you explain for everybody?
Yeah, I'm suddenly realizing I don't know that much about
breakdown.
The science of composting.
Okay, so this is what will become compost. We bring it into one location, and then how does the composting
where do you take
work?
it?
What is that process?
Sure. So in general, for your basic home composting, and for your basics of even larger scale static pile or aerated static pile composting or windrow composting, the most basic thing to remember is you've got green material, which is nitrogen based. That's your food scraps, and then you've got brown material, which is your carbon-based materials, and you want to have a ratio of approximately by volume, about 2/3 browns to 1/3 greens. Wow. And your brown materials, the best thing you can use is dried out leaves. So fallen leaves, those are gold. So for home composters, when if you have leaves on your property and you bag them up in brown bags in the fall,
leaves.
you want to save those, and you want to use those all throughout the year. You may even want to, depending on how much your quantity of food scraps that you generate at home, you may even want to grab bags of leaves from neighbors, and hopefully you have a place to store those, maybe a shed, or you can store them outside. You can even just build a little wire area and just stack your leaves in there and take from there when you need them. That's going to allow the leaves to actually break down on their own, which is only going to help the process. But basically, microbial activity is what does the work. So if you have your ratios right, the microbes start cranking, the piles get hot. The heat's a byproduct of the microbial activity.
Wow.
But
how hot does it get?
So you ideal, you want around 140 degrees Fahrenheit in the center of the pile, and there are these cool compost thermometers you can buy that stick into the pile and check your temperature.
You can use it for other things too.
Sure. You want it hot enough that your seeds from any of the weeds that might be in your pile, you want those seeds to break down. But you don't want it so hot that you don't want it. I don't think you want it hotter than 158. I believe is the number.
So what then? It's a fire hazard?
No, just then you start to lose some of the nutrients.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if it's below 140 and the seeds germinate.
Just if you have some weed seeds
Grow.
or in your compost, then
What happens?
whenever you use the compost, you might just have some weeds grow.
And then the weeds take away from the nutrients because they're obviously living and
Nobody really
being a
wants nobody like wants to put down compost and then have weeds spring up. Look, I mean, you might
how
have,
hard
you might
is
have
that?
some of you
How
might
hard
have
is
some
that
of
to
that.
avoid?
I mean, if you're conducting your composting process correctly, then you should be able to avoid it for the most part. Or if you can just avoid, having weed seeds in your composter. But if you're composting garden waste, yard waste, you might have some. But like to me, the important thing is that when Michele and I started Circle Compost, our goal was to keep the company's mission is to prevent organic discards from going to landfills.
Mm-hmm.
So composting is the means to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We want to create as high quality of compost as we possibly can, but our goal wasn't to create the world's greatest compost. Our goal was to, all these food scraps that are going in landfills. Another sort of moment, in addition to that Aaron Sorkin episode that I mentioned, for me was so I've been on the board of a group in my textile scrap life called the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles Association, the SMART Association for short. And I was in a board meeting, or actually I was at one of SMART's larger events and looking at landfill composition. SMART's mission is to prevent textile waste from going to landfills. And landfill composition is less than 5% textiles, which is still a lot of weight. But looking at this graph, it was like 25 to 30% food scraps were going to landfills. So that was sort of another moment where Michele and I talked about that, and again said kind of like, what can we do? So anyway, that was our goal, was to keep these food scraps, which have energy in them, they have nutrients in them, they're a resource. We wanted to prevent those from going to landfills, where not only are those nutrients and is that energy wasted, but it actually becomes harmful to our environment. When food scraps are in a landfill, they don't break down properly, and they help to generate methane gas, which is up to 80 times worse for our environment than carbon dioxide emissions, which is what you primarily hear about because of all the cars we drive. So in any case, our goal is to take is to recover food scraps, keep them out of landfills, and we do that by making compost. If the finished compost that we create isn't perfect in that they're we don't want weeds to grow from the compost.
Can you educate the layman what's like a peak Ponce de Resistance compost, whereas you got some like basic ass shit? Like what's really gonna like?
Can you tell?
And how can you tell? Yes, can you like eye it? I know you had told me something about the smell before.
Well, you want like an earthy smell to your finished compost. It shouldn't smell bad. It shouldn't.
Why shouldn't it smell
so
bad?
when as your food waste is breaking down while it's sort of semi-finished or on its way to being finished, you might have some smells if you go into the center of your pile, because you're essentially rotting food waste that's in there. But once it's broken down into compost, it sort of looks like dirt. They call it black gold, and you get kind of an earthy smell to it. It's all about depending on what kind of, if you're a home composter, it depends what kind of a pile you have. But it's all about your pile maintenance. It's all about making sure there's plenty of air getting to the material. Can
you talk about like the pipes and the turning over?
Yeah, well, for home composting, you probably don't need a pipe situation.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just turn your pile frequently, you could turn it every day. That's great. The more the better. You could turn it once a week.
And so that's because you're getting the oxygen in there.
Yeah.
So that things can actually breathe.
Yes. You need air. You need water. And the compost will be about 50% moisture. The actual compost, compost holds a lot.
I guess that makes sense.
Holds a lot of water, and that's why one of the end uses for compost is it goes in those long socks that then help control like construction runoff. It's just one of many end uses for compost, and obviously for that end use of compost, it's not as important to avoid having any weed seeds or something like that in the finished product, because it's going in this sock. Now, how environmentally friendly the actual sock material is a whole other story that I can't necessarily answer.
I'm sorry, I'm not picturing this sock.
it's like a sock, or like they're often called like a boom. It's just like a long
Like
you've
I was
seen
picturing
them-
like a sandbag.
There was
kind of
one,
thing.
yeah, it's like that. There was one like around that sewer when they were at one point when they were
Yeah.
building around the corner from us here.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
So where's like where do you keep your piles?
We manage some small piles that are really kind of community based. Just
Like
at,
within the city?
yeah,
or like
just
in
at,
the-
just at 4 different urban farms and gardens around the city. And then there's one larger site where we bring more of our commercial stuff and we pay them to do the composting. We don't manage those piles.
Gotcha.
And that's a constantly evolving situation. One of the you can't start a composting business and just have like 1,000 customers sign up the next day, because you have to make sure you have capacity, not only to do all of these pickups from whoever you're working with, but also to make sure you have capacity to. There has to be composting capacity to get all of this
Sure, yeah,
done. So that's that's a constant conversation.
How
as well.
difficult is that? Is it like
It's challenging.
outside of cities, even in some cities, it's difficult? Is it more tenable in rural communities by nature, maybe because of like amount of land?
Yeah, I mean it's a state by state thing, and yeah, it is more tenable if you have more land and more of a rural area, but it's a moving target, so to speak.
Okay, so I got a question for you. You were talking before about you said 20 to 30% landfill scraps is food waste.
I've seen that on charts.
And now is
on
that?
charts, yeah.
Do you know if that's regional, if that's national, international?
I believe that was national. I
Okay.
believe that was United States.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it's-
don't think it was global.
Do you think it's probably lower internationally? I mean, we do go hard with our wastage here.
We
But
are,
I mean, I'm sure
yeah.
it's at least 10%, right, internationally. So that's huge.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Obviously we know it's considerable, whatever it is, right? Do you have any type of, because I think a lot of times now, one of the things that actually really got people disenfranchised was they'd say, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, what's going to happen, right, in terms of what's my society going to look like? And then people would say all these really positive things like, oh, we'll have vertically, horizontally integrated communities that'll be fully self-sustaining and microgridded, and we won't have to rely on other things and stuff like that. But people's whole way of life is so different than that level of sustainability that they actually thought it was like a fairy tale. They're like, that's not even real, that's never going to happen, you stupid liberal, or something like that. But I think now in recent times, people are more understanding that not only is it very valuable, but it is possible to have these paradigm shifts in how we're more sustainable as a community. Could you give like a 20, 30 something down the road view of your understanding of like what would a society look like that could compost totally to the best extent they could? What would that be? What would that look like? What would be the effects insofar as you understand it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I understand what you said with regard to like, I don't know. It's possible that people would look at composting or just environmental progress as something like as kind of a liberal issue, but to me, it's not a liberal or conservative issue. It's not a Democrat or I'm sure. Yeah, and I think that that's generally true. I think that I'm sure that probably some of the people doing some of the largest volume of composting in this country probably are conservatives,
farmers.
Republican. Yeah, yeah. So I don't see it at all as a liberal or conservative or Republican or Democrat issue. Even if you don't believe that climate change is man-made, right? Let's just say you don't believe that. Okay.
Yeah.
You still could very much believe in composting and in taking actions to fight against climate change. change. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so even if you don't think it's man, like you just because you're not, if you're someone who doesn't believe that it's man-made, you don't have to necessarily. It doesn't mean you're someone who feels that we're helpless against it, where our only answer is to pray. You know, maybe maybe there's still all kinds of things we can do to mitigate the effects, even if you don't think we're the ones causing it.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to answer your question about 20 to 30 years down the road because.
Are there any examples of societies right now that are fucking killing it?
Well, it's funny. I mean, because you figure for most of human history, I mean, composting and like being closer to the land in some sense was kind of normal. I mean, it's only in the last century or so that, you know, so much of our society is premised on stuff that's like just not recyclable or, you know, centralized. Just the idea that, you know, someone's just going to pick up all our trash and go, you know, throw it in the landfill or whatever.
It's funny, the dude who created plastic, 2 years after he sold the patent for I think $45 million, he figured out how to make biodegradable plastic, and he said that this was the great tragedy of his life, because then he realized what ended up happening, and he said, hey, man, if I just hadn't, but once it sold it, I mean, it's too late, but he said it could have been a completely different paradigm. Even now, I mean, it obviously would have been out of control, but at least it would have been biodegradable. Yeah,
you know, there's a company called TerraCycle. You may have heard of them. That started, I think, in 2001 or 2002. The founder of the company's name is Tom Zaki. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. It's spelled S-Z-A-K-Y. But I followed them. I followed that company for a long time, and I've read one of his books. And you know, he claims that every type of waste or scrap that we produce is now recyclable. It's just a matter of separating it so that it can be recycled, and we don't do that. Now, we here in Philadelphia, and in many municipalities across the country, we do separate our recycling. And you know, by the way, there have been many issues with continuity of actually recycling the materials that we separate. I think Philadelphia, as far as I know now, for the last 6 months or so, is recycling everything that's collected, but there was a time that they weren't able to. So I
have to say that was one of the saddest articles I've ever in the last year or something. They're like, well, they're just taking it out in the backyard and burning it, basically. Like
right, but you don't want to you can't stop the separation. Because you need people to stay in the habit of separating it.
Definitely.
And if you have a capacity issue, and as terrible as that is, you can't recycle this source separated material for a period of time, you still need people separating it because you're obviously working a ton, you're doing whatever you got to do to start getting that recycling process going again, and you don't want people to get out of the habit of separating. What's interesting is that I think that, as far as I know, part of what caused that problem was when China stopped taking our waste to be recycled over there, which, if you think about it, that's sending our waste over to China to be recycled is not so environmentally friendly, right? You've got all the fuel you use to get it over there, rife with issues. In a perfect world, which obviously our world is far from perfect, but ideally, having that problem come up would lead to innovation here, where we create more systems here to be able to handle our own waste locally. I mean, the further the waste has to travel to be processed, the worse, the larger the negative impact on the environment. So I'm not sure if that's what's been happening with regard to recycling. In any case, there I don't remember the name of the city, but I think I read this in one of Tom Zaki's books, that there's a city in Japan where you have like 35 different bins where you put your waste. Because
That's so fucking bad.
Well, I'll tell you, they were like, I had a friend who lived in Japan, and they were serious. I mean, like, they wouldn't pick up your trash and recycling unless it was categorized like in the right boxes. Like, you'd have to,
which is just so Japanese.
Like, he would have to, I remember when I was staying with him, we had to drive to the dump or whatever, and because he had screwed up.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about
about it.
Like entrepreneurship and what young people can do today. It doesn't have to be young people, but
I've got a
what can
about
people
that.
do today to start a business? Like, what's a good idea to start a business? Okay, how many people out there are trying to create this awesome widget that's going to make our lives more convenient? right? So
I think
instead,
more
so
and more,
instead of
but still not
I don't know, going downstairs to get my banana, I've got some widget that just throws the banana up to me. That's obviously that's a bad example, but my point is there are all these people out there
It'd be kind of impressive.
always trying to create new products to make our lives more convenient, right? Or it might not even be a new product to make our lives more convenient, but they're trying to create some new product, or they're trying to brew some new delicious beer, to open some new restaurant to serve that beer. How many people are trying to create businesses or processes or systems to deal with our waste? So
Yeah.
the ratio, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure the ratio, the balance is way off. There are way more people, trying to create some new widget than there are trying to create a way to process our waste. Now, again, in an ideal world, everyone who's creating a new product, it just comes with the territory that you have to have full product life responsibility, where it's built in that your new product. Here's here's the product that we're presenting to the world, and here's how it gets processed on end of life for the product, and here's how it gets recycled or reused or whatever, what have you. But that's not the case. So
yeah, and in fact, I mean, not to interrupt, but
sorry.
I mean, the law in the United States is crazy. I mean, I have a friend who lives up in I don't know all the details on this. I might get a little bit of it wrong, but he lives up in Liberty, New York, and there there was some kind of industry. They polluted the water, for instance, and then the company just moved away, and U.S. law was such that they were not liable for it. Now they just jack the taxes there.
Yeah, close down the business. How are you going to sue a business that's now closed?
Exactly.
And there are ways that happens, but So anyway, we need in my mind, we need the smartest people in this country, the most intelligent people in this country, entrepreneurs in this country. No, not me. No, yeah, not. We're working to create ways to better process our waste and deal with our waste, and that's not necessarily a pure entrepreneurial opportunity to do these kinds of things, because a lot of times you have to work with municipalities, you have to work with government, you have to.
As far as things that government would cover, it would be great if they did that.
Yeah, well, governments, especially at the municipal level, are very interested in all of this. They know governments, municipalities across this country have landfill problems. And even if they're not environmentalists, okay, they just know that they don't have enough landfill space to deal with all the waste. I mean, walk around Philadelphia on trash day, right? How much trash is there? Especially right now, we're filming this right after the holidays. How much trash
Your
is out
Christmas
there?
tree, you guys open a supplemental.
Circle does Christmas tree recycling, yes.
Nice.
I mean,
Next year, book it now.
we hate. I mean, maybe my eyes are maybe a little more open because we do Christmas tree recycling. But how much do you hate walking around the city and seeing Christmas trees going out to trash? I mean, it's a total bummer. I mean, here's a tree that it has. That's relatively low-hanging fruit. I'm not saying it's easy for it is easy for a Philadelphian to sign up for our tree recycling service if they live in Circle's tree recycling area. But if you don't have that knowledge about that service, yeah, it's not easy if you live in a big city like Philadelphia to figure out a way to deal with your tree.
Yeah, totally.
It's not simple. But anybody in the composting world or organics recycling world, a tree that's easy. That's low-hanging fruit. Composting companies, farms, even just tree services that would help manage, trees that are planted around a city want mulch for their trees. So, grab all these trees, get them together, mulch them up. That mulch has so many uses. I don't remember what we were talking about.
Well, I was thinking I was saying, before we started the podcast, I've been watching this lecture by this, anthropologist guy that I really like, David Graeber, and he was talking about one way of changing how we talk and think is moving away from the idea of economics as being about on the one hand production and on the other hand of consumption, where it's the classic example of you're well, we got a cup here, there's some labor that went into this, you make a cup once, but in the end, you wash it how many times? 10,000 times. And then, where does it go after you're, suppose it cracks? Where do the pieces go? Mm-hmm. And he was if we could rebuild economics from the ground up, we should base it on the concept of, care. And, maintaining things.
Yeah, like total utilization.
Yeah, totally. And because so much of what we do in the end is, you know, work that's like essentially like caring for not just like other people, but like also for the environment.
Well, you talk about creating jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, people like to talk about creating manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
Right. We need more manufacturing in this country, and I'm not saying that I'm against that, right? But what about some balance? Like, you can create jobs on scrap processing as well, and that does happen. I'm not saying that this is
Well, it's
some
like figuring
revolutionary
like
new
what do
idea.
we have, and like what can we do with it, as opposed to like what's the latest gadget? You know, I need like something for my banana or whatever.
I feel like we
Bring it up
should
2 stories.
We should
I don't know why I thought
employ.
of banana.
I like that example, though.
I do like banana thing.
We need to employ people to go around and be bees. You know, like that's what we really need. We need people
need
to like
bees.
just do the bees' job at this point.
You know?
You know, and
We
other
need
people
bees,
to
yeah.
try to figure out how to fix sudden colony collapse and all that terrifying stuff. But if you just do the job that a bee would, you'd be quite useful.
And we just need more bees.
Yeah,
Actual bees.
no,
as
I mean,
well.
but that's
So,
because we don't have it like we used. So before we were talking about entrepreneurship, I feel like there's this paradox, and it might not always be the case. Like, we can get to a point of civilization level self-sustaining and knowledgeability around it that, like you said, from the get-go, it's like you need to be this conscientious of product lifestyle, product development, scaling a business, and so on, but in a way that is not so difficult for people because of the infrastructure is built up enough to support the new business owners, or however it works in the future, that actually a lot of people could do it if they so choose. Now, you probably have to work really hard, but you could do it. That's not the paradigm right now. Right now, I think about, okay, so like I want to start a business myself, and I think to myself, okay, well, you've got to get to this critical mass point to be able to make it keep going at all, right? And in that period especially, I think a lot of people are more willing to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And here's one of the great ways to sum it up, which is in startups, in the period of the scaling of the startup, you have to do things that won't scale. Do things that won't scale, but they will help you on the way to a self-sustaining scaling model.
Like, what's an example?
Like, an example would be like if you reached out to a bunch of people to do something, but the type of people you reached out to and the way that in what you wanted them to do and stuff like that, it wasn't like you were going to be able to get a vast amount of people to do it, and it was basically like a one-shot trick, and once you did it, it was done.
Okay.
Now, it was useful because it helped you to leverage this other thing in your business so that you could be more successful, but it's not something
So
that
you're
you
saying
can...
something like I want to start a solar panel company, but like I'll take this grant from ExxonMobil, you know, to kickstart, and then, you know, be like, well, I'll, you know.
It could be anything, really, but I think that for me, I think, okay, how could I start a business? And then ultimately I have these aspirations of when I have a significant amount of liquidity in my life that I can really do special things like help certain types of environments a lot, buy the land up, restore it, things like that, give it back, empower the communities, build schools and things like that. That all requires like a lot of liquidity, right? And I feel like there's the very realistic juxtaposition of the entrepreneur right now where you fuck the earth to get that money, and then you're like, now I'm gonna be the good guy, and now I'm gonna help the communities, and now I'm gonna help restore the forests and everything. But in the meantime, you had to cause this gigantic...
It's very like, you know, it's like you sin and then, you know, you ask for
You're like, oh, now
forgiveness,
I'm
you know,
comfortable enough that I can ask for forgiveness and I'm willing to help.
Well, I mean, I also don't think it's necessarily like that black and white.
Oh, of course
I
not.
think, I mean,
Of
it's
course
just
not.
like we were talking about this a little bit before we started filming, but it's really difficult. It really is very difficult to do things that are, you know, forget about perfect, but like it's just really difficult to do things that are like overall positive for the environment. I mean, just as an example, you know, if I manage the business I've worked for 18 years, we deal a lot in textile scraps, right? But, you know, we have, like, if we're going to take these textile scraps and make them into a new product, there's still packaging involved with that product. It requires a lot of energy consumption to create that product. And, you know, you could list stuff like that for almost any business that I can think of. You know, recycling in and of itself, you know, uses a lot of energy, not just for the collection side of it, but to actually go through the process. These are all imperfect processes, just like we live in an imperfect world. So yeah, but you know, I think what you're speaking of is sort of like a more extreme example. You know, someone who makes billions and millions of dollars and then starts a foundation to give back afterward. You know,
to all the people they screwed or something. Yeah, that kind of thing happens.
Yeah. So, but you know, all of this is really difficult. You know, even if you have like the best intentions and you keep in mind what's the best, the most environmentally friendly decision.
Yeah.
Like even if you think about that every single decision you make, you're not. It's not going to be perfect.
It actually is more hamstringing in a way. I'm glad you bring that up because when I lived in New Zealand, I worked for a sustainability services startup, and I remember that we held this keynote conference at one point, and we had a woman who was a climate scientist there from New Zealand, and she had actually given a TED Talk previously, very esteemed in the community. She was actually a consultant for Bhutan, and for those that don't know, Bhutan is a small country next to India and China, where they've decided that it's all about being net positive for the environment and the citizens. So actually, instead of GDP as their highest valuation of like a distinguishing factor of how their their society is doing in a successful way, it's actually gross domestic happiness. And so they have this happiness index for how fulfilled are the people in the society. And so too, along with this, they're committed to being carbon negative on a country level. That's their goal. Now, she's a consultant for them. And it's really interesting. Bhutan is so stringent that it's almost impossible to get in the country if you're an outsider. They only allow, I've heard they only allow 150 tourist visas per year, which end up being, you have to be a kind of like a distinguished person among that 150 to even get it. Like, oh yeah, it would be relevant for so-and-so to become because maybe they would spread the word in a way that's positive or something like that.
What's the country's population?
It's not a lot of people. I think it's definitely less than 10 million.
Okay.
And it's probably the size of maybe it's like 2/3 2/3 the size of Utah, I'd say. So not a lot
geographically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So not a lot of people. For the size of the land, relatively speaking. But I remember asking her about this because I thought it was so fucking cool. I said, so how's it going? And she said, honestly, I don't think it's going to work. I said, why? And she said, it's just too much. It's just too much to ask at this point in time for where Bhutan is as a country in terms of infrastructure at this point in time. She says it's this crazy juxtaposition. It's like, well, it would be easier if you were more developed, but if you were more developed, you would have had to do things that were sort of crimes against the environment and humanity, so to speak, to then get yourself in the position. And so it's kind of like, it's a goal for them that she said in the short to medium term is maybe impossible to achieve.
I mean, it's weird because it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe there's a sort of stereotyped like path to like development that people take or whatever, but it actually seems like it'd be easier if you were starting, you know, a little bit, you know, more from scratch to be able to like build more sustainable systems to begin with. I mean, because like a lot of this stuff, you know, you think about like the United States, like for example, we're like so locked into cars, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, obviously, cars, historically, you know,
People know
part
the
of
value
American
of
culture.
cars, yeah.
But it's, you know, for example, you know, in the 1950s, there was a huge push due to, you know, the Cold War fears of nuclear war that, like, because, you know, the cities are going to be like sitting ducks, like, just, you know, blow up these, you know, New York City, Washington, D.C., you know, the government encouraged, you know, the growth of suburbs and the building of the highway system as we understand today, as opposed to, you know, what had been the dominant trend before that, which was trains. I mean, to the extent that, like, it was a, so far as I understand, government policy to, you know, cripple in some ways, say, like the New York subway, precisely in order to make the city, like, less accessible, in a way, you know, in hopes of, like, decentralizing the country to make it less vulnerable. And, you know, that was a choice. And maybe it made sense, or like in some geopolitical way, you know, at the time.
Yeah, sure.
But then, you know, there's like this sort of nightmare situation where, you know, those same mistakes are just repeated over and over and over again, because that becomes the idea, like, this is what it means to be like a developed country or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to an architect on a plane once, and I said, I hear about, I'll read articles and watch videos about this latest new thing in architecture all the time. And I said, but I never see any of it. And he said, yeah, I mean, no kidding, right? I mean, it makes sense, though, that you wouldn't see it, Pete, because think about it.
Who can afford these
your
fucking
building's
these
already
houses?
built. Just
Well, that
because
too.
the new building model comes out and it's way better, you're not going to knock down your building and build a whole new one. That doesn't make any sense unless it's really time for you to build that.
Well, there's
and
a
the new
huge problem
model,
in
like, really
architecture
aligns with
generally,
it.
where it's just like the only people who can afford the most like experimental and like avant-garde buildings are just, you know,
Yeah,
millionaires. And
he
so
had
forth.
said So I said, how far are we behind from the cutting edge of what we can do? Where are we on a societal level in terms of how we generally operate with our infrastructure? He said 40 years. And that's just, and it's like that in certain industries, if you even want to think of architecture as an industry. But it's like that with certain things. It just takes time because buildings are there. I mean, once you build the building, you can't do the latest, greatest thing the next year. I wanted to transition, if you don't mind, talk about the Cowboys firing Jason Garrett.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so he's out after 3 days or something, 3 meetings, multiple days.
Yeah.
My thing about the Cowboys is that, and I was talking with my buddy about this last night, is Jerry Jones totally changed the game in terms of monetization in the NFL. And come to today, and I know that the Cowboys make the most money out of any team, and they're the only team with a $5 billion market cap, and then the others in the top 5 all have less than 5. Number 2 is the Patriots with, I think, 4.3 or 4.1. And the Cowboys pull in $350 million a year, more than any other team.
Is that the total they pull in for everything, or
That's, I think, from Jerry World, from the
ticket
stadium,
sales?
from the
Yeah, I was
stadium.
gonna say, is that-
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like, wow, yeah, you changed the game. Now it's like way more profitable. All these teams are, some of them were $100 million. Now they're all $1 billion plus or what have you. Just a totally different paradigm, and everybody in business is like, wow, this is so great what you've done. But then you look at it from like a winning perspective, especially now, because before he brought in, what was his name? Was it Brian Johnson? Or
When are you talking about?
So Jerry, when Jerry originally came on the scene, he brought on
Jimmy Johnson?
Jimmy Johnson, and that worked out great. Until egos clashed too much, and then it didn't. And then
Yeah.
he brought in another coach, and it worked out again.
Barry Switzer
Got another Super Bowl.
I think Barry Switzer kind of was able to get that one Super Bowl win, just kind of like sort of it was the tail end of Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah, off the strength of what was there.
Yeah, I think yes. Yeah.
Okay, so now he gets Jason Garrett, who's ostensibly a yes man, and like a really good human carpet. I mean, he does seem like a nice guy. He does.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe in a way to his detriment. And so now they're gone. I mean, I feel like Jerry should probably, what would be best for him ultimately would not be to quit as the owner, because he would probably feel like he has no purpose.
He should quit as general manager.
But he should quit as general manager, and he should just stop all media appearances, pretty much.
He's not going to do that.
Yeah, I know, but he should, right? So what do you make of this crazy paradigm where basically like the owner is just screwing himself out of the team, and people all, like millions of people all around the country loving this team, but Cowboys fans aren't that outraged with Jerry yet. They're still not that outraged, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. And my buddy last night says it must be weird to be a Cowboy fan. It's like an authoritarian dictatorship.
Well,
it's really like that.
That's what all NFL teams are like. But first of all, I just want to say I think that the way you transitioned to talking about the Cowboys was sort of that Aaron Sorkin episode was sort of like a micro version of what we've just done, because we were talking in depth about all this environmental stuff, and then boom, we flipped to the Cowboys. But I'm not knocking.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I like talking about sports, but anyway, so I thought that was kind of cool. But I mean, the best example is the Redskins and Daniel Snyder. I mean, they have been so bad. The Cowboys have at least been mediocre most of the time, and like good a couple times over the last 20 to 25 years. I mean, and don't forget, you had Jimmy Johnson, then you had Barry Switzer. I forget who came immediately after Barry Switzer, but then Wade Phillips had a little run in there, and Jason Garrett was like the star offensive coordinator for Wade Phillips, and then as Wade Phillips like managed to get contract year after contract year, Garrett became the highest paid offensive coordinator in the league. He was making like $2 million a year as their offensive coordinator, because Jerry Jones knew that Wade Phillips would eventually not want to be the head coach anymore, and he wanted Jason Garrett to be like, just waiting in the wings, primed and ready. So Jason Garrett, like between his time as offensive coordinator and head coach, I don't know how many years it's been, but he's sort of been like either the main man or like the man waiting in the wings for a long time. Who knows what they'll do now? And there was a time.
What about Josh McDaniels?
I don't even remember when Bill Parcells came in and consulted with the Cowboys and coached. He coached the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Bill Parcells was the coach of the Cowboys when Tony Romo first became the starter.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember like Parcells was always had these great press conferences, and I remember like Romo came in and like did well, and they had this clip of Parcells that they played over and over again where he said, "Don't get out the anointing oils just yet." And it was the first time I think it was the first time I heard the term anointing oils. And it just kind of stayed with me for a while. One of those weird things that kind of stays with you. Anyway, I don't really have a point, but you mentioned about the Cowboys. So you did have a question, yeah? And I don't know what he's going to do. They shouldn't be. They're not going to press the reset button on their personnel and start.
Nor should you,
because they have a really stacked offensive team. They've got a pretty good defensive team. Zeke Elliott's one of the best running backs in the league. Dak Prescott's been good. They have a great offensive line. They've got solid receivers. I mean, I think that's why Garrett was fired, because they have all this talent on offense, and he's an offensive coach, and their offense was just awful in some weeks this year. I mean, they were terrible against the Rams. They were horrible against the Bills, although the Bills have a great defense. I don't know what he's going to do. Cowboys fans, you're right. Jerry Jones gets a pass. Like Redskins fans despise Daniel Snyder. I went to college with a lot of Redskins fans. I went to UVA. A lot of people from Virginia are Redskins fans. They are beside themselves for years now with Daniel Snyder.
Yeah.
But you're right. You don't see that from Cowboys fans about Jerry Jones.
They're against the great leader.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, they've won 3 Super Bowls under Jerry Jones, so
it's been a while.
People are just kind of hanging their hat on that. I don't know. Jerry Jones does kind of get a pass, but you mentioned something about authoritarianism, and the NFL is like a great example of like a monopoly, and I mean maybe it's a stretch to say authoritarianism, but I mean, and Roger Goodell
Hey man, the Shield man.
But forget Jerry Jones. Like Roger Goodell is he's the monarch. He's the king of it all. I mean, look what they're doing to Antonio Brown right now, who I'm not excusing in any way. Like I read some of the stories about his group text.
What you're about to say, dude.
Like for Antonio Brown, like I
inexcusable.
Let's forget about all
He's
the antics.
He's losing his mind, man.
Yeah,
He's losing his
forget
mind.
all the antics, like when he was with the Raiders for like a hot minute, and then sort of like self-sabotage there, and then was signed with the Patriots right away, which like so many people expected to happen. You called it. I remember that. You put up a Facebook post in those few hours in between where you're like,
I made a bet
he's going to sign with
the same buddy who made the authoritarian comment, and he made the worst bet in the world. He said, "No way he'll sign with the Patriots,"
which is bizarre because
like let's bet right now. He's like, done.
Yeah,
Give myself $30.
Yeah. So, but forget about all that stuff, which was like all that stuff he did with the Raiders was bizarro. But then he signs with the Patriots. And who knows? Like obviously none of us were in the room when the Patriots talked to him when they signed him and all. But everybody knows, if you're an NFL fan, like everybody knows that the Patriots, they'll give you a chance, and then once they give you a chance, once they sign you, and a lot of people, there've been some great success stories.
Moss.
There's been a lot with the Patriots, but like everyone kind of knows that they lay down the law, like no antics, nothing. We keep things in house. We don't want any media problems. And then what does he do? Like within a week, he plays 1 week for them, and somewhere along the way, he sends out a group text that includes the person who one of the people who accused him of sexual assault. He sends out a group text including her, and basically makes like subtle threats, or maybe even not so subtle, about her kids, and I mean just bizarro world. So that's terrible, and I'm not. Like, whatever. Like, I'm not in any way excusing any of that. But now look what's going on with him, where he's out of the league, and nobody will sign him because all teams know that once he's back in the league, Goodell could and
no, he will. They'll have to suspend him.
They'll have to put him on this exempt list.
Yeah.
And he won't be able to play. So he's just.
But here's the crazy
he's
thing
just
about
in limbo.
that. But here's the crazy thing about that is that if you're on the exempt list, whatever the contract is, you must be paid because it's a paid list.
So nobody will sign him.
No. The league has to pay for the contract.
The league pays the contract?
The league pays for the contract if they're on the exempt list. So this is the interesting thing about the Saints play. When the Saints brought him into practice,
the Saints worked him out, yeah.
Which he totally failed the test of being able to like think about anything but himself, because they're like, hey, no entourage or anything. He brings a fucking camera crew. Oh my god. But anyway, so the thing is that if they signed him, he's not exempt from playing right now. But basically, if somebody were to sign him, then they would have to put him on the exempt list because of the behavior. It's just that the Patriots cut him so quickly that they didn't even need to do that. The NFL didn't need to do that. But what happens is they can give Antonio any type of contract that they want, which of course is probably not going to be a lot, luckily in a way for them because of everything that's happened. So they have to pay almost nothing for him, but they don't even have to pay it because if he signs, he immediately will get put on the exempt list, and then the NFL has to pay for the contract.
I didn't realize that, and now that you've said that, I'm actually kind of surprised that nobody's signed him. I mean, it's got to be because of the antics and all
I would imagine.
I mean, the guy obviously, I don't remember what his last contract was with the Steelers. I know he had, I think he had 5 or 6 years in a row of 100-plus receptions. And I'm sure he made a lot of money doing it. I don't remember what his contract was. But the guy clearly also like spends quite a lot. If you just look at his Instagram, I mean,
I've never seen it on
yeah. So I don't follow him, but I've when he pops up in the news, I've looked at his account from time to time because, I just, it's just interesting to see the antics and whatnot. As a fan who's not in any way emotionally attached. But the guy clearly spends a lot of money too. Maybe he's set for life and he's got it all figured out. And he's ideally like any of these guys that make that kind of money, whatever paycheck they get, they put I don't know whatever percentage of it into savings and make sure that they're all set. Who knows if he's doing that or not? All I know is the guy has a lot of toys and does quite a lot of shopping, or he's just, or maybe a lot of brands. I wouldn't think so nowadays, but maybe a lot of brands are giving him a lot of stuff. I kind of doubt that now.
I doubt it.
Anyway, yeah, you're right. Like Cowboys fans, not that I talk to a lot of Cowboys fans, 'cause I don't, but just in the general media and what you see, it seems like Jerry Jones gets a pass, whereas clearly Daniel Snyder, I know Daniel Snyder is not, just from like, at least just anecdotally speaking with like friendships I have with Redskins fans that I went to college with and stuff, they all are just so beside themselves about what's happened to the Redskins under Daniel Snyder. And the Redskins are a storied NFL franchise. They've had a great an amazing, impressive history, and it's pretty bad right now for them.
What's really funny about the general manager situation with Jerry Jones to me is that
I don't know how much Matt really wants to talk about this, by the way. So.
No, I'm fascinated. It's not something I know that much about.
no.
But hey, look, this is your podcast. You guys are the partners
no,
in this
just
podcast.
I'm
not trying to.
To pull back the curtain a little bit. Matt and I espouse things to each other frequently that the other has little to no interest or understanding about. But we still appreciate.
But one in my revenge, I start talking about quantum physics.
Yeah, we still appreciate the education of it. Like, there's still things that we get out of each other.
Cool.
Especially because it's not something that we would cover.
I mean, professional sports are very much in all of our faces, I guess, right? So.
What I was going to say about the general manager thing about Jerry is that Jerry. It's weird because ultimately, he's done a bad job, but really. Amari didn't get a contract that was crazy, did he? He was supposed to.
I think he got a pretty reasonably sized.
Okay, but it was supposed to. All right. I remember the Amari situation. But anyway, but they did sign him, right, for a significant.
Pretty
portion.
sure they locked him in.
And then they gave Zeke the craziest one.
Yep.
But then they're both not performing. But then they haven't given the contract to Dak. And Dak, the quarterback, has performed best out of anybody on the team this season.
Yeah, he's been solid. It is surprising that they haven't given him a long-term deal. But maybe they're going to franchise him. What's interesting to me is just, the team owners, that's one thing, right? They are essentially... authoritarian or whatever, and that I guess that could be said for almost any business owner. But then Goodell and the league, I mean, what's most interesting to me is just how like these professional sports leagues they basically have monopoly, and I guess I haven't followed as much of it with other leagues, but with the NFL in particular, Goodell just seems to have so much power, and he's butted heads. He's very professional. He doesn't. When I say he's butted heads, he doesn't go out to the media and make a lot of noise.
Yeah, it's all behind closed doors.
But from everything I've read, I mean, he's had some serious run-ins with Jerry Jones and with Robert Kraft, who own the two most valuable franchises and are two of the most well-known owners. But at the end of the day, the owners are the ones who essentially employ him, and they keep him on because his initiatives, while he's been commissioner of the NFL, these guys have just made so much money. I mean, I don't know if it was Goodell's idea to like start up Thursday Night Football or the NFL Network, but just those two things alone, I don't know what the numbers are, but those two initiatives have made so much money for these owners. And I mean, Goodell makes an insane amount of money, but
does he? How
much
money?
For an individual person, he makes an insane amount of money. But when you look at it from the perspective of the owners who pay him, it's not that much money for them. I think he makes $40 million a year.
Okay.
So that means that every owner is chipping in like $1.5 million a year or something to pay this guy who has helped them to make so much money.
Yeah, so it's
right. But if you think about from his perspective, it's a ton of money. I mean, $40 million a year. Think about that. It always. But
that's one of the. That would be like a max contract.
Well, that's the thing. Like any of these contracts, like when you hear about a guy making, think about like the baseball contracts, right? Or like Bryce Harper. Or something.
Not the baseball or the basketball contracts, but for football, that would be like a max contract.
I don't think anybody in the NFL makes that much per year. Any player. I don't know what the highest paid player makes, but I think it's in the 20s.
No, Zeke did like a 3-year, $100 million deal or something.
I don't think it's that high. Yeah, no, I don't think it's that level.
Nemo.
You can check on this. Fact check this later. You can put a little flasher on the bottom.
totally.
This is what Zeke actually makes. But
Yeah.
but think about it. If any one of these guys makes this $26 million a year, they're getting paid $500,000 a week. Like, think about how crazy that is. Like, it's so, and I'm not knocking it. Like, that's what the market has led them to make. But like, that is just so much money. It's an absurd amount of money.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And then, for parody, David Stern died on Wednesday.
Yeah.
David Stern was the old commissioner of
30 years
of the
he was
NBA.
commissioner of the NBA,
Yeah, and when he came into the league, the average basketball salary was $200,000, and then everybody started freaking out when Magic got his 25 years, $25 million deal. $1 million a year.
25 years?
Something like that. It was like, we'll give you $1 million a year for 25 years or something. Or something like that.
I think you might want to fact check that.
Okay. I'm feeling
I
like,
that idea.
I know that Magic got the $1 million deal
Okay.
at the time, which is the first ever. And then how he just like totally shifted the paradigm, man. Totally shifted the paradigm, changed everything.
We played so we have this little tradition where we play Trivial Pursuit with another family that we're very, very close friends with every New Year's Eve.
Mhm.
And it's
Did you win?
No.
Sorry.
No, and it was really upsetting this year to lose that. So we match up where the teams are my wife Michele with our friend Tim, and then I play with Tim's wife Julie. And Julie and I had won 2 years in a row, and we lost this year, even though we blew it. Julie and I blew it. No, not to discredit Michele and Tim on their win, but anyway, one of the questions we had, which I thought was kind of like a bizarre question, just the way that. So one of the questions was, this league has the most combined social media followers. So when they said this league, I thought they meant like. And first of all, they didn't say like, okay, is this like combined across like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Didn't specify what company or anything, and I assumed like it was like the league itself, like people following like the league's account.
No.
So it turned out the answer they wanted was the combination of all the players. And I don't even know if even the answer specified platforms, but anyway, it was the NBA.
Of course.
Had
By far.
because they were including all the players' accounts, like LeBron. And
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just one of the questions we got, which we got wrong.
I think Odell Beckham Jr. has like the most out of any football player. He has like 14 million. Like LeBron has over 100. It's
But yeah, like the way the question was framed.
Now, is that because it's like more? Well, I just was reading about how big the NBA is in China.
Yeah,
Is that part of it?
That's
Like,
a huge
okay.
part of it.
I think it's honestly more though about the structure of how the game is played. Because if you think about the game, it's like, okay, you have only a couple people on the court at any given time. The way that the game is actually structured, you can really have one player that just takes over the entire game and can really control everything. So from a focus standpoint, it is okay, more propensity to focus on singular players, and then they're not wearing pads, so you can see them a lot more. Personalization is higher, whereas way more people on a football field, way more things to consider. They're all wearing pads, and arguably a lot of people would say that out of a lot of the big marquee sports, NBA coaching is the least consequential. Whereas a lot of people will say that football is the pinnacle of coaching out of any sport in the entire world.
American football.
American football. Yeah, a lot of people say that. And I can see that from the sports that I have an understanding of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the NBA just they have I guess the biggest global stars right now. I mean the biggest soccer stars in the world, the biggest football / soccer stars in the world
Soccer's
are also
still,
huge
still
stars.
Bigger.
As a sport, it is.
You play soccer.
I do.
You're a star.
Yeah, I'm not a star, but I do play. Guys like Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, huge global stars. But LeBron James probably just as big of a global star now as those guys. Soccer / football around Philadelphia is is an awesome thing. You know, I know when we talked earlier, I mentioned that you know, it's something that we could potentially talk about a little bit, and
Break it down.
Yeah.
just, you know, playing, like, I mean, I guess I've been playing in adult soccer leagues since moving here to the city in 2003.
All indoor?
No, outdoor too.
Okay.
And you know, I guess in general, when you think about like adult sports, not non-professional, you know, where you're not doing it for a living, just for fun.
Adult sports. So that's such a funny phrase.
yeah, it is funny. You know, just to stay in shape. You think about it as like something to do instead of going to the gym, or maybe in addition to going to the gym, and just a good way to get a workout, do something social. I mean, if you're in your 20s and you're single, it's also, or even if you're not single, it's just a good way to meet people, you know, socially. And for me, as it turns out, you know, playing in adult soccer, and I've played in probably 10 different leagues around the city. And I think a lot of Philadelphians, you know, people who are in the know that there are just like a lot of leagues to choose from, and all different levels of competition. But if you like just move here, you might only know of like one league. You know, there were a bunch of different ones that kind of merged into PSL, and PSL is great leagues. But there are leagues in Fishtown and Kensington that have been around. I mean, there are guys playing in these leagues that are in their 50s, and they talk about playing when they were in their 20s. You know, these leagues have been around for 30 plus years. I don't even know how long a lot of the leagues have been around, but really just amazing competitive level. There are such good players in that part of the city of all ages, and it just so happens that through playing in adult soccer leagues, I've met a few people who have become like almost like family to my wife and I, to my wife and me. And one of the guys who I met just playing ball, he and his brother, Matt Subitz, and his brother is Drew Rinaldi Subitz. Matt's the executive director of Grow Philly, and you know, my wife and I are on the board of Grow Philly since 2016 now, for you know, I guess 4 years. And we see Matt all the time. He's like he and his son Theo and his wife Sandy. They're like a part of our family, and his brother Drew is like a part of our family. So in any case, it's just, you know, it's just been something really special to me living in Philly, playing in leagues around the city, not only from you know, a fitness and competition standpoint, but just getting to know different neighborhoods in the city, learning some of the history of some of these neighborhoods, and some of the history specifically of football/soccer in some of these neighborhoods, and then just, you know, meeting people who have become really significant in my family's life.
Sure. You were also saying before that you wanted to talk about like coaches that you had early on in life and their influence on you.
I was just very
Jason Garrett's.
the Jason Garrett's. I was just very lucky to have really excellent people as coaches when I was younger, specifically in high school. The coach, I went to Lower Merion High School, suburbs. You know, moved to Philly. Grew up in Bala Cynwyd, so moved to Philly after college, and in high school, the high school soccer coach Bob Davidson, who passed away suddenly a few years ago, was really devastating, and it was just, he was still so involved in the Lower Merion soccer community right up until his death. He ran the alumni game every year. He ran a blog where he would update everyone on that season's teams, games, and you know, that was how I kept up on Lower Merion soccer. He was very involved with the Special Olympics right up until his death. His funeral, they did more than one viewing. So I guess when I was there, there were easily 100 people lined up, but apparently there were a few hundred people from the Special Olympics who came.
That's so cool.
To the viewing, which is really just a tribute to the kind of person he was and the life that he led. But he was very influential to me, and then Coach John Linehan, who's a legend in the world of men's lacrosse, really across the nation, and is maybe known globally somewhat too. And thank goodness he's still alive and well. He was recently inducted into the National High School Lacrosse Coaches Hall of Fame. I couldn't make it to the induction, unfortunately, in upstate New York, but a few friends of mine went. He was also very influential on my life growing up, and not everybody plays organized sports. It's not something that everybody has to do. For me, it was significant.
What makes a good coach? Is it the same thing that makes both of them good?
They had some characteristics in common, but actually also but very different styles. And part of that speaks to, I think, the way that soccer/football and lacrosse, men's lacrosse specifically, are different as sports.
Sure.
But Coach Linehan was more like the Bobby Knight style. One of the big events it sounds trite, but one of the big events for me growing up was one of the times that he just really kind of went crazy on me. We were winning a game 13-3, and I guess I ran off the field a little too slowly or something, and he just lost it on me on the sidelines. Just went absolutely crazy, and overcoming that for me was a big deal. I was really upset, that night, and even the next morning I was still upset, but still had to go to practice the next day. And I think it's important. This is my opinion, but I think it's important for children growing up to experience, difficulty.
Totally.
I
gotta have the struggle.
Yeah, I don't want my children to be coddled. I want good things for them, but I want them to experience struggle and overcome difficulties.
Well, it sounds like in that case, it's a form of caring. It's not just struggle for the sake of struggle. It's
Tough
more
love.
this person, cares enough about you to, freak out on you, to critique you. You know
Right.
what I mean? As opposed to just mere indifference or just ignore, whenever you fucked up, just, don't want to look at you.
I kind of imagine it as just constructive adversity. Adversity that, because adversity in itself can be really, really visceral. It can maim you. It could kill you. It could irrevocably scar you.
Mm-hmm.
It can.
Whereas this is sort of saying, I believe you can be better.
Yeah, you make this organized, constructive environment. We're okay, we're gonna put some game theory in here for the set of the rules. Sort of indicative of a larger life of rules, but obviously way more simple. Okay, now do your thing, and it's gonna be really hard. I think that getting your ass kicked in that environment is just the best thing ever. I've had some great coaches in my life as well, and a lot of different mentors in a lot of different areas. But just about the sports aspect, one of the coaches that I had that I really appreciated, his name was Nandor Verez. And he was from Turkey, and he used to coach for the national team. And he was a hard ass. He was my tennis coach, and he was really he was no bullshit. But he was also ride or die for his students. He had students stay with him and his family, and when you stayed with Coach Nandor, you did whatever his family would normally do, and there were no special conditions that were set upon you. You're gonna live, you're just like one of my sons now. And interestingly, his son, also named Nandor, Nandor Jr., one of the most physically, I don't know if gifted is the right word, definitely determined people I've ever met in my entire life. This guy, the Iron Cross in gymnastics? You have the rings and you hold them out like this.
Yeah, sure.
So he could do a reverse Iron Cross. He could do an upside down Iron Cross.
So feet up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he was pretty legit, and he was pretty hardcore. But I remember these days in Florida where they would train us, and sometimes they would come to Boulder, where I lived at the time, in high school, and they would just grind us to a pulp. And
Doing what?
well, they would do these, just the way that the like when we would do conditioning, and then just the way there was two main things that created this break down and build you back up paradigm. One was the conditioning, which was just more nuanced and more intensive than anything that any of our sheltered lives had ever experienced. And then the other thing was, and so we would do conditioning for at least like an hour every practice. But then the other thing that was really profound was that the amount of focus that you needed to have. It was like you were saying about the coach saying, oh, it's 13-4, but you jogged off the field too slowly. If you let your focus slip for one moment and it's your turn to hit the ball on the line and you're not focused, now you don't have to hit the shot exactly how they want it, but if they notice that you're not doing all the things around the form and the effort that they've instructed you to do, oh yeah, you're just going running laps, like immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. There was no mercy for lack of effort. There was no compromise on having the best relationship with yourself.
It's interesting you use the term no mercy, because I don't know if you guys watched Cobra Kai at all.
No, what's that?
Well, I guess we don't have to get into it, but it was a series on YouTube. It was kind of a follow up from the Karate Kid from back in the day. And did you watch the original Karate Kid?
I never have, actually.
Okay, well, never mind. But basically, like No Mercy in the original Karate Kid, it's definitely a negative thing because it's like no mercy on your opponent, right? But then like Johnny.
Why is that negative?
Well, because it's basically like your opponent is like down and like ready to like die, or and like you're supposed to just.
Oh, but isn't that just unnecessary? I mean, that's not really mercy.
Well, it's okay. So if you watch the Karate Kid,
okay.
from back in the
I don't
day,
know the plot line.
You'll probably end up agreeing that like the Cobra Kai philosophy back then, the whole no mercy thing, like it's just not that cool.
Yeah.
But then
they're not doing that. That's not how they treated us.
Right. So
They're
then
not putting
Johnny.
you in
So then in Cobra Kai,
situations.
which came out like a year or two ago, Johnny, who's like the like chief bad guy from the first Karate Kid, he brings back Cobra Kai, but he tries to make no mercy into like a more positive thing, more like in the way that you mentioned it, like no mercy on yourself, like you like life will like chew you up and spit you out if you aren't hard enough on yourself, and stuff like that. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh,
you
that was it.
Yeah. So the other coach, the one who passed away a few years ago, Bob Davidson, he was just, I mean, and Coach Linehan was like this too, but just so disciplined. I mean, just methodical with everything that we did in terms of the drills that we did, the skills that we were working on, the scouting of opponents. I mean, at least I think probably across the country, high school sports. I mean, I don't know if every sport scouts, but or every team has the budget or the personnel to scout. But we always had scouting reports on who we were playing, and just learning how to prepare and how to prepare both yourself and how to prepare a team and how to play with a team. And I think there's like a fine line right between individualism and individual effort, and then being part of a team and being selfish and being selfless.
Yeah. Well, on that note, you were talking about the early influence of Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
Well, where did that come from, and then where did it go?
A friend of mine, when I was like 20 or 21, maybe a little bit younger, a friend I went to high school with, she was really encouraging me to read The Fountainhead, which a lot of people know from the scene in Dirty Dancing when it's mentioned by this guy who the one who raped Penny, or didn't rape. Sorry, didn't rape. I don't think he raped Penny. I think he just got Penny pregnant, and then wasn't willing to help Bobby. Bobby was real jerk.
I've been recently thinking about Ayn Rand in terms of in Mad Men.
Okay.
Bert Cooper, founder of the company, so always talking about Ayn Rand.
What did he do?
He just always talking about Ayn Rand. I think they were friends, like at least in the world of the show, maybe earlier.
Ayn Rand is still really prevalent, and
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean the Koch brothers.
Koch brothers. Alan Greenspan.
Yeah. So
Alan Greenspan.
yeah.
They're friends,
And meanwhile, I've really dated myself with like talking about the first Karate Kid from 1984, and now Dirty Dancing. But in any case, I finally she told me for a while to read it, and I read it over the summer of maybe 2000, 2001, and it was just really eye-opening for me, and it helped me in a lot of ways just to, part of her philosophy is, pursue things the way, you want to pursue them. Don't let other people pull you down. Don't, if you have an idea and you think it's a good idea and you think it's a positive idea and something you want to pursue, and everybody around you tells you, oh, you'll never be able to do that, or oh, don't do that. In that regard, Ayn Rand's message can be very positive and really help people. Over time, and she's I don't remember if she wrote another book. I read The Fountainhead. I read Atlas Shrugged. I read both of those that summer, and I'd previously read Anthem years before for high school class. I didn't read any of her other stuff, but she'd written either an essay or a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. So she took selfishness, as sort of like, for her, the virtue of selfishness, or like individual self-interest, she looked at that as the basis for all capitalism, and she looked at capitalism as being able to solve any problem. As I got older, looking back on her writing, first of all, she certainly wouldn't be one of my favorite writers from a stylistic standpoint, or just, from enjoying the actual writing. I mean, the last, I don't even remember, 30, 40, 50 pages of both The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged are just the main characters, or at least The Fountainhead, just kind of going on some long monologue about, why, what he did, in the case of The Fountainhead, what Howard Rourke did, was just, the perfect thing to do, and there's just no way, nothing else that could have been done or should have been done. But also, I don't believe that capitalism can solve all of the world's problems. I don't believe.
Well, yeah, it also seems like no, I haven't read that much Ayn Rand. Like, actually, I got my libertarian whatever from this guy Terry Goodkind, who wrote fantasy series called The Sword of Truth, which I think played a similar role. But I don't know. I think about Ayn Rand so much like the early 20th or first half of the 20th century, especially, is obsessed with this idea of mass culture, because you had radio, television coming along, but just in general, the masses are rising up, right? We're going to form the Soviet Union, this and that. People trying to understand. I remember in college reading a book, The Revolt of the Masses. And Ayn Rand seems to be in this sort of tradition where, there's the sort of the mass individual who's just sort of content to just, they're doing their own thing, and they're constantly sort of dragging down these elite people who are the brilliant ones who are, and it's just interesting to me the extent to which, people continue to, relate to her work, at a psychological level, even though so many things about society have changed.
Yeah, and she, so, just as an example, she sees each business or each business person as sort of this individual unit who should just pursue their own self-interest. Market dynamics will take shape. Everything works out, right? She seemed vehemently against any sort of trade organization. She thought they were just a waste of time. I've been really involved with SMART, who I mentioned earlier. I've been on their board since 2011. And I see a lot of value in trade organizations to represent the interests of that particular industry. I remember being in college and reading. This was probably just one line from this particular case study, but it stayed with me. And the perfect business model, okay, the perfect business model is a PO box where people send checks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you look at business, right, and you look at the object of a business being to make a profit or make money, right? How do you make money? Okay, you have higher revenue than cost, right? So this was like, I think this was a Harvard Business School case study, and again, it was probably just one line, but right? What's lower cost than a PO box, right? You have no cost, okay, but you have revenue just pouring in, right? Okay, so think about that as your ideal business from a purely dollars and cents sort of perspective, right? So now look at businesses. Look at a major chemical manufacturer. Okay, if it's cheaper, if it's a lower cost for them to pour all of their runoff around their factory and just dump it all out and let it. Who cares if it goes into people's drinking water and into the streams and just completely destroys the environment and makes people sick, and you have deformed babies in that area because this chemical manufacturer because it was a better business decision for them to just dump it out all over the place, right? So Ayn Rand, her answer would have been eventually market dynamics would have taken hold, and because all of these people were deformed and dying and sick, there would have been a need for a company to come along and clean all of that up or something, right? But realistically, is that really what's going to happen, right? When this chemical company is paying off local politics or whatever it is.
The movie, Todd Haynes movie about like DuPont, poisoning West Virginia.
I haven't seen it, but that's probably based on
a true story.
The lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, so I read the New York Times article about that lawyer, and it was like blown away. So to me, it's like I just don't think it's realistic that that market dynamics are going to solve all the world's problems. Now, I'm not a socialist or a communist or someone who's like ultra far left. I probably fall somewhere in the middle, in the sense that there are some issues where I lean right, and other issues I lean left. But regardless, I don't know that Ayn Rand took everything into consideration in her philosophy. I don't think her philosophy was all encompassing. Even though if she was here, she would scream and yell and say that
what do you think it
I'm
came
wrong.
from in her life?
So,
I get the sense it was just like a projection of an unhappy childhood onto like social and economic relationships.
She grew up
probably people in her class like made fun of her.
I think she was born in communist. I think she was born in communist Russia. I believe she came over from the Soviet Union, where
you gotta say the Soviet Union did not help the communist cause. It's really counterproductive.
I heard counter to that. I heard that Stalin was only 5 million people away from successfully creating a utopia via the Great Purge method. I'm just joking. That was an Onion article title I saw recently. Yeah.
Nothing like a purge joke.
Yeah, nothing like a purge joke. It's interesting, man. Right. I think that's what it has to do with a lot at the end of the day. People.
Yeah, because whereas when I think about socialism these days, it's like my cousin Maggie had a great sweatshirt she was wearing. It said something like anti-social justice warrior.
Wow.
And I like that.
Because
the doubleness of it's not so much anti-social justice warrior, but anti-social justice warrior. And I was that's me. I'm a socialist personally, but that doesn't necessarily mean I like being social. You know what I mean?
This is really interesting, right? Because I think people think about okay, well, these people are trying to think about what's best for the world, and so to speak, right? But then you bring up the thing of, well, what was their childhood like? Mm-hmm. What was their upbringing like? What was the cultivation of their physical lens of how they see reality, right? And that just doesn't get talked about enough. How at the end of the day, the way people talk, the way people walk, the way people work, they interact with each other, the ways that they live their lives, it's so heavily dependent on their own self-image. It's so heavily dependent on the type of family or lack thereof that they had when they grew up, their social dynamics and everything. And people think of it as this really black or white thing, but it's all so emotionally charged.
Definitely. Yeah.
For these underlying fulfillments that these deluges.
You also just summarized the thinking behind every Star Wars plot for the last, at least since Disney took over. Really, probably all along.
What, that it needs to be all black and white and there can't be any?
No, just like family dynamics, sense of self, emotions.
I hated the new Star Wars movie. It's just so sad what they've done. Although The Mandalorian's fantastic, they actually used, they studied, because it's like supposed to be like a spaghetti western type deal, right? With The Mandalorian, the TV show on Disney Plus. It's not a plug. If we would be so lucky for big corporate America to want to sponsor Arvoyarns, so we would have the opportunity to say no. That's not the case yet. But that show is really cool because they were actually so obsessed about getting that original trilogy, New Hope trilogy, Star Wars flair, that they studied the camera angles.
Sure.
And the lenses that they would use, and they said, okay, we're only using these lenses that they would use. We're only doing camera angles in the style that they would do it, and that's how it has that New Hope flair.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen it yet, actually. Yeah.
Conversely, Star Wars, the movies, atrocious. It's I think I was saying maybe to you the other day or somebody, I think it was you. I said. And this was before I saw the new Star Wars movie. I said the worst type of creativity is checkbox creativity, which is you say, okay, well, I have this goal of making this whatever. Instead of channeling my artistic process, it's, okay, let's get that funny thing. Okay, we now have the sexy thing. All right, where's the awkward thing, the sad thing, the redemptive thing? Here's the cool, enticing action sequence, and it's just checkbox movie making. It's
formulaic.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
and it's terrible. It just defeats everything.
Well, it's like when producers create boy bands and stuff like that, right? It's like and the songs are written for those boy bands and stuff like that. So are you a democratic socialist then, like what Bernie espouses? So okay.
Yeah, I think Bernie. I like Bernie.
You like Bernie?
I could go farther left, but I think Bernie is fine for now.
Okay. I don't have a candidate who I am really feeling any extreme love for at the moment. I have a lot of respect for Bernie. I mean, it amazes me how you've probably seen those videos where they show him speaking over the years and he's saying the exact
have you seen
same thing for the last 30
consistency.
So I respect that.
When he got arrested,
I like
for
him
the
as
civil rights movement.
I don't know if I've seen that, but I like him as a senator. I don't know if I would personally back him for president for a variety of reasons, but I do respect him.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. Yeah, both the consistency and then also just the people that he would bring along with him, just the whole DSA apparatus and all these people working on policy. Because in my mind, what's the president compared to
all the
people
policymakers?
who, have the ideas and the programs and stuff like that. And
he scares me a little bit. In the sense of potentially, for my taste, being a little too far left and just not having a good understanding, a good understanding of businesses and business. Now, no, I understand that there are extremes the other way, but I don't love the villainization of some of these large companies, especially when it's across the board.
Sure. Well, but is that... Well, so, I mean, there's two issues. One is, as you said, a villainization or a setting up of like, okay, this is like 1% versus 99% kind of thing.
Yeah.
Versus whatever his actual policies are.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, and I don't know that much about exactly what his policies would be.
Yeah, 'cause his policies might be good for business.
Here's the thing about that I think that ultimately his policies would be good for business, but in the short term they wouldn't. It's the type of thing when we were talking about the infrastructure before, about having things built up to a certain extent, because I think what inevitably happens is, and right, let's take his minimum wage. Let's take the minimum.
Like minimum wage, or like child care. These
let's
things.
take the minimum wage one, right?
Wouldn't a business be happy not to have to pay for those things?
Well,
the government can help out.
Yeah, but
business doesn't have to pay for their employees' insurance.
No. So let's take the minimum wage thing, right?
Daycare.
So this is a really interesting thing, right? And you see it in Australia. And I lived in Australia, right? So the minimum wage in Australia is $22.50, dude. It's fucking ridiculous.
That's U.S. dollars. That's.
No, it's AUD, but it converts to 18 to 20, depending.
That's countrywide.
Yeah, and so I think the highest minimum wage in the United States is 15, and it's interesting because you say, okay, all businesses minimum you can pay is 15, let's say, and then all these businesses are like, that's 3 or 4 times what our margin is right now for work. It's gonna kill us. We're not gonna be able to do anything, right? But the interesting thing is that, yeah, you just took money away from the business in the short term because they have to pay more to the employees inevitably. But there's now, as far as your market is concerned, your market just got injected with maybe an order of magnitude more cash than it otherwise would have had.
Yeah, like
And so it's interesting
you pay
how
people more, they can spend more.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly.
So it's interesting how it
yeah,
goes both ways. But how fast does that balance out?
Yeah,
and that's I think one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I mean you can see that like things like the minimum wage, certainly like a larger business is able to like recalibrate and like deal with that more easily than like a small business. But then when it comes to, like I was saying before, like stuff like health insurance and so forth, I mean to the extent that that's good for small business.
Having lived in Australia and New Zealand, you should 100% have, everyone should have health insurance. Everyone should have the ability to be protected to live. Absolutely. That is a basic human right that everybody should have.
It's weird that we get it through our, most people get it through their
What's
employers
interesting about the Australian juxtaposition is that the two biggest economic problems recently in on a global scale were the dot-com crisis and the 2007 crash, right? But and the dot-com was in '99, and there's a lot of market ups and downs from there. The dot-com crisis in '99 and the 2007 crisis neither tanked the Australian economy. The Australian economy has been growing for 26 years. It has not declined a single year.
Why do you think that is? What do you think?
A lot of it's mining. A lot of it's because the truth is that because the vast I've heard that actually maybe not the vast majority, but the largest single accumulation of mining resources in the world that are able to be sourced right now, given the infrastructure of the country. Like, for instance, it's probably Africa at this point, but the infrastructure isn't built up there to the extent that it is, and centralized in the sense that it's one country in Australia. I know people personally that lived in Australia that made $180,000 a year with no degree immediately out of high school.
I mean, I had a friend who was
mining.
like, he was like he wanted to move to Australia to work in the opal mines.
Yeah.
And he'd make like a lot of money, and it was crazy because you'd like live like in the mines.
You don't
like, have like
leave.
an underground house
leave.
cave.
Yeah.
It's the craziest thing I ever.
Yeah,
heard.
and then you'll work for like 3 weeks, and then you'll get like a week off type thing.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
Intense.
so it's it's super intense. It's definitely the type of thing that can't be sustained, obviously, because mines are a finite resource. I think but that's one of the big things. That is definitely one of the big things. That's sort of bootstrapped their economy for a long time.
Well, yeah, you
Yeah.
were saying before you had some friends in Australia.
Oh yeah, so yeah, the fires, dude. The fires have been fucking crazy, man. Yeah, I have friends in a lot of different areas. It's mostly on the East Coast that the fires are a problem, and mostly up in Queensland and New South Wales, which is like the top right corner in the middle right area of and it's not, my understanding, it's not so much in the southeast, which is like where Melbourne is, which is where I spent most of my time. So I don't have too many contacts, but yeah, I mean, it's bad. I mean, people are having to evacuate, but then they don't have anywhere to actually evacuate to, because the fire is so large in actual scope that they end up going into the water on the beaches, and they just have to. The fire gets all the way to the beach, and then if you were to be on the beach, you would die, and then you get into the water. There was like a circumstance recently where a town that was evacuated, they all ended up driving their cars into the ocean, or the river or the lake or something,
Crazy.
so that they didn't get caught by the fire. It's interesting because I posted something on Facebook about this recently. The most interesting thing about it to me is that the world's not freaking out about it the way that I think it's very, very problematic. And I think it's because people still don't and of course I think I don't even realize it because it's such a exponential curve in terms of the problem of it, but I think as a civilization we still don't realize the effects of climate change and how certain things that are happening now are really unnatural, like the fires on the extent that they have been, but to not to Australia's credit, the interesting thing, and this is the only personal experience I have, or semi-personal experience I have with fires and fire management in Australia and in bushfire control. I used to live at Uluru, as I've mentioned many times on the podcast, the largest rock in the world in the middle of Australia, and up until the 80s. So the largest rock in the world, right? It's 2.5 mile circumference. It's like taller than the Eiffel Tower, and the seismograph says it's over 60 miles deep, right? So it's just like a glacier. It's barely sticking out of the sand, right? But since it's so big, it actually creates its own mini ecosystem in the giant red desert, where there is not much life. Actually, there is a lot, but in a way, there's not a lot. But around this rock, there's a forest. That's because the Uluru is so big that when it rains there's pools of water which form around Uluru year round and they can stay there because the shadow of the rock keep it shaded enough where it doesn't evaporate. And so there's pools of water which exist around Uluru. Some of them are seasonal and some of them exist year round to different extent. There's actually even fish in some of them. And so this echoes out, and so in the surrounding area there's like a forest that surrounds Uluru. But up until the 80s it was way bigger. And there was kangaroos and emus and all of the native wildlife that was from Australia. They all were in that area. They would all hang out like at the rock. There was actually kangaroos at the Uluru Rock and everything. There's no more kangaroos. There's no more emus. There's no more any of that. And the reason is because back in the 80s, because the white man took over the land and everything, and they actually renamed it to Ayers Rock. Uluru is not even the set name for it. It's actually the name of the landowners because the tribe, the Mutijulu tribe that owns Uluru, there's like this one family in the Mutijulu tribe that's the chief of the tribe, so to speak, and that's the Uluru family, who's actually led by Cassidy Uluru, who I met numerous times. It's actually a really tragic story because he's like a dysfunctional alcoholic, as a lot of the Aboriginal community suffers with, because they don't have the enzyme to break up alcohol. So like one beer is like 8 beers for them, and so alcoholism was like really bad. And the Aboriginal community, and they used it to basically fuck the Aboriginal community. They would just give them this stuff, and then it would just crumble their society, and then they would just come in and take advantage of everything. So Cassidy Uluru, the name of the rock is Uluru because the chief of the Mutijulu tribe, the family, is the Uluru family. But as soon as the Uluru family is no longer the leading family of the Mutijulu people, which are on that land, there's like 300 different tribes. If you look like at an Aboriginal nation map of Australia, it's fascinating. It's like, looks like Europe, but for Australia. It'll change names. It won't be Uluru anymore, which is interesting, right? It's not how we commonly think about names of monuments. Anyway, they named it Ayers Rock, and they took it over, and they made this kind of predatory deal with the people on the land there, and they basically said, hey, we're gonna basically make it a resort. We'll give you some money and a place to live and subsistence every year for forever, for letting us use this land. And of course, it's peanuts compared to what they're making. The Ayers Rock resort, where I lived and worked for 3 months as a waiter, is
on the rock.
No. It's 5 kilometers away. Is in the top 3 most expensive resorts in the world. Just because of it being so remote that everything costs so much money. The closest town 6 hours away. Mm-hmm. So in the 80s, so they like totally screwed the people, and they're like, and it's crazy because the people don't like it when they would never go on the rock except for really, really special ceremonies, because they consider the rock a living thing. So it's like, I wouldn't just walk on top of my grandma. It's like that. And so to bring the desecration to the nth degree, the Aboriginal people in the community used to do for thousands of years, they would do slash and burn on the land so that the fires didn't get out of control, so that the overgrowth didn't get out of control. And then when the government came in, they said, oh no, you're not allowed to do that anymore. We're going to do what we want to do. And so in the 80s, they were doing no controlled burns. And there was this crazy fire. And it killed all the kangaroos. It killed all the emus and all of the native animals in the area. And so now all of the big mammals and all of that type of sizable animal, they all either fled or they died. And so they've never come back, and they probably never will unless they get reintroduced.
Now, do you know how...
And now they're calling for it. Sorry, the reason I told that story is because now they're calling for that in Australia again. The Aboriginal people are like, let us do controlled burns. Like,
so
this is
even
ridiculous.
now, that's not policy. Like the controlled burn thing. Like they're still... All right, that's crazy, yeah.
That is absolutely crazy.
And why,
Different ideologies, please people come up, and it's like, it's not black or white, right? It's like, oh, well, I'd prefer if it was just my idea, other than, you guys have this thing, but I want to do my thing. Anyway, we're almost at time.
Yeah. But this has been a great conversation.
David has been awesome.
I've enjoyed it. So much. Thanks, guys.
I've learned so many things from you. Thank you very much.
Really? Thank you. Well, thanks a lot for having me, guys. It's been really fun.
Yeah, man. Well, we'll hope to have you on soon. You want to plug away? Go ahead. Is there any plug you want to make for the compost business?
We talked about it. Anybody who watches, who checks out this Arvoyarns, feel free to check out circlecompost.com. That's my wife, Michele. It's her company, my company, and if you're a Philadelphian looking to compost, we can help you out. But yeah, other than that, no, I don't have any other. Grow Philly is an amazing nonprofit here in Philadelphia that we're involved with. They were Circle Compost first nonprofit partner. My wife and I are also on the board of Grow Philly. Do great things around Philly, centered around music education, sports, primarily soccer and drilling down. It's mainly futsal is the specific type of soccer program they do, and then also urban farming and urban gardening around the city. So those three things may not seem connected, but they're all community related, and it just happens that the executive director of Grow Philly, Matt Stubitz, has always been involved in all three of those particular activities, and he has amazing programming in all three of those areas. Well, thanks a lot, guys. It's been great being on, talking to you guys. Always enjoy talking to you guys off camera, so it's been fun doing it on camera.
Yeah, well, thanks again. Yeah, we'll put links in the description.
Happy New Year.
Arvoyarns.